Frances was at the Media Design School for many years as chief executive, and that got her going, thinking about ways to educate people. And then from 2013, she started up Mindlab, and then quite soon after that, Tech Futures Lab. And Gisborne's played a disproportionately large role in that work because of the main centres, Gisborne, Mindlab, Gisborne's been an important one, and she's made a big difference here in the region to people learning those tech skills. So it's a great pleasure to welcome you, Frances, to be our speaker. A big hand for Frances, please. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. It's a great privilege to be here this morning. I do feel like between Activate Tairawhiti and ECT, who sort of adopted me a few years ago to activate the Mindlab here in Gisborne, it was a great privilege, and actually the second place we ever opened outside Auckland. So I do feel like I have a home every time I come back here. And so today, having the chance to talk about some of the learnings that I have had over recent years, and perhaps probably even more importantly over a lifetime of working in education and technology, is I'm full of hope, which actually I think there is so much potential in a new generation. And one of the challenges we have as adults is actually getting out of the way to let them reimagine the world. And having spent so much time with youth across this country, from the far south to the very top of the north, what we do have is a generation who are actively looking for change, not blame, but just let us get on and do it. But I want to put multiple lenses on why we need to think differently. Because if we look at the lens through the eyes of a young person who have inherited a planet that wasn't perhaps the way they'd hoped to have received it, they're doing things which make us feel uncomfortable. And a lot of it's driven by the technologies they're using to actually mobilise change. And so I think about some of the ways that they are able to bring the technology to bring tribes together, to connect whānau, to actually enable people with like-minded drives and ambitions to actually form collectives as part of the change we're seeing. I want to just start with this quick video of some of the things that have happened in the last few weeks that sort of, again, change our world.
I want you to act as if the house was on fire. I have said those words before, and a lot of people has explained why that is a bad idea. A great number of politicians have told me that panic never leads to anything good. And I agree. To panic unless you have to is a terrible idea. But when your house is on fire and you want to keep your house from burning to the ground, then that does require some level of panic. We are in the midst of the 6th mass extinction, and the extinction rate is up to 10,000 times faster than what is considered normal, with up to 200 species becoming extinct every single day. Erosion of fertile topsoil, deforestation of our great forests, toxic air pollution, loss of insects and wildlife, the acidification of our oceans. These are all disastrous trends being accelerated by a way of life that we, here in our financially fortunate part of the world, see as our right to simply carry on.
So I wanted to bring the story of Greta, and I've heard her name being mentioned many times today, but she is a great champion of our time. But I also wanted to select a couple of other videos which are probably quite hard-hitting. You're seeing robotics doing the job of humans, and we often go straight there when we think about the future of work. We imagine the worst-case scenario. But in many cases, automation and robots are doing the jobs to enable us as humans to do better things with our time. Higher order thinking, doing things that are more creative, going back to being more craftsmen. And so we have to think about why are they taking those roles and what purpose do they serve. I also want to show the video of SpaceX working with NASA, because that's a collaboration that would never have happened in a different time. NASA having the dominant effect of the space industry, and then coming in with SpaceX, which is basically a startup like Rocket Lab, but then also going on a mission, a paid mission for Saudi Arabia. It just goes to show the changes that are going on right before us. And this happened a few weeks ago, and most of us wouldn't know about it. And the amazing technology where they saw those 3 jet propulsion rockets land perfectly upright on the place they left from. But technology has also been this incredible enabler for all. It's been the tool that has connected information for all of us to learn by. And I think this is quite astounding just to think 25 years ago that the tools that President Reagan had in his hands were less than what a Maasai warrior would have today. And what that means is the world is unfolding in front of us in real time. We know what is happening as it happens, and so our youth are making decisions far more informed than any of us ever had access to. If you think of the limitations of the information streams, we may have listened to the BBC radio at school or had a set of an encyclopedia, or our parents or our community, but they too were limited by the latest edition, the cost of access or limitations of geography to getting access to books. But also the fact is these students are making decisions based upon their collective opinion together. And so we hear about these technologies and we get a little overwhelmed. But most of them are a product of the time of change, set to make us think about the world differently. But we also have a massive shortage of talented people in this world. We have a greater opportunity to find jobs in this country than we've had for decades. And right across the world, even in the US, are having record levels of unemployment. So we can sit back and think we don't need to learn, but we need to understand. We need to understand a whole generation who talk a different language and imagine a different outcome. Because they are our team human. And when we look at team human, we have to think about the augmentation of what we have resources to do. And part of that will be digitised. Part of it will be incredibly real. We're responding, and most of us saw this when Jacinda recently was awarded the #1 place in terms of compassion by the world leaders. One thing that's changed significantly is this idea of trust. Over the decades, we first of all trusted government, then we trusted local companies and organisations. Then we moved on and we started to trust NGOs and non-government organisations. But this year saw a significant shift in the global barometer, and trust has moved to the people we work with.
The story of trust in 2019 is a very important change in the landscape of trust. Trust used to be conveyed from top down, vertically. Then about 10 years ago, it started to move to peer-to-peer, horizontal, through social platforms. Now people only trust that which is very close to them, very local. This year, trust has moved to the employer. My employer is actually at 75% trust globally, a phenomenon born of lack of belief in other institutions at a time when there's deep dissatisfaction with the system and there's deep fears about loss of jobs to automation or to globalization. The cry for help, in a way, because I can actually trust that which is close to me, where I can look.
So we think about the people close to you, and you think about that through your own lens. The people around us we trust. But now we need to get enabled and empowered and vocal, because actually we know what we as a community can achieve. But I talked about the augmentation of humans, and some of that becomes quite intimidating quite quickly. And I'm going to use this as an illustration. This is a study that's been done at a university at the moment, which is creating artificial intelligent humans that are designed entirely by an algorithm. So one of these two people here is an algorithm-created human, and one is real. Hard to tell. So she is real, with the green box. Now, on this website, every time you go, you see hundreds of these images of who is real and who is not. So trust is becoming more and more in the real world we live in. Because we don't know what we read is truthful. We don't know what we see. We don't even know truly whether the information sources we have we once trusted have not been influenced in other ways. So I want to play a short video which is from the Mindlab in our Auckland lab. And the reason for this is actually nothing to do with the Mindlab, but actually by a virtual teacher, a digital human developed by Soul Machines, a New Zealand company that is an artificial intelligence human that teaches. But they're a cognitive being, so they understand and respond in real time to your own understanding and emotions. Let's have a look what that looks like.
Here's what happened when I met some students for the first time. I can help you become an energy expert. What should we start with?
Geothermal genius.
Magma from the Earth's core comes closer to the surface and we end up with volcanoes, hot springs and geysers. But do you know what magma is?
Molten rock from the outer core.
Absolutely right.
I thought Will was really, fantastic.
Like he's there looking at us. It's like a real human.
Here's a quick question for you. What do you think is the windiest city in the world?
Wellington.
Nice. If the sun is so far away, how long do you think it takes sunlight to reach us?
10 minutes.
Correct. You're a solar superstar. I was curious if they liked me.
It's different from talking to Will than talking to Siri, for example, because he's there, you can see him.
He was quite human-like, even though he's an AI.
So it's amazing how many people see that and get quite threatened by this idea that actually an AI could be teaching our children. But what we have to see is the benefit of technology is giving them access to information that we could possibly never give them. And in many places in the world where there's short of the teachers, like in New Zealand, that actually this augmentation of information that's at your fingertips is going to lead to a whole generation more informed. So part of the message I want to get across today is this acceptance that some of the digital technologies that are adopted that feel very unfamiliar have a place if we are going to achieve some of our global ambitions for sustainability and the environment. Because this is the platform that connects. It can all come down to one battery that's not working. So in the last 60 years, the world population has gained 4.5 billion people. So before that, it was a fairly flat line. And this morning as I drove to the airport, they were talking about the new royal and saying that's great, we have a new prince, but he's one of 360,000 children born today. And it dawned on me again how fast this world population is growing. And it's not going to slow down, we expect, for at least another 20 or 30 years. So in this population that's growing, we have to think about where the mobilizers are, where are the champions of change? Thank you. We find them here. Generation Z, 22 years and younger, fully immersed in our school systems and just starting to creep into our higher education institutes and into the job market. They are formed by a totally different world than we imagined. Most of them have no recollection of anything pre-smartphones, which first hit the market 11 years ago. Take your average 18-year-old, and they can't remember a world where technology was not at their fingertips. And this population is much more diverse. It's also very young and populous. And they are connected in a way that previous generations were not. And so what we do know is half the world's population now is under 30. Actually, it's the mobilization of youth under 22 that are really going to change the way we think about the future. Great examples are, we've talked today about the change of how we might eat and the reduction of meat products. When you suddenly realize that the Whopper has become a plant-based burger, you know that actually vegetarianism and veganism is becoming mainstream. When you look at the data here at the top of Gen Z, who are vegetarians, pescatarians or vegans by comparison to previous generations, who en masse are choosing by acting differently, that this is not a trend that's about to change and will only grow stronger as more information is shared. Or that we can imagine now that second-hand clothes will surpass fast fashion within the next decade by a group of Generation Z who are more than comfortable buying second-hand or in the thrift shop or in sharing economy. Not because of a financial reason, but because it's the right thing for sustainability and individuality. And we're seeing again the rising of youth who are just uncomfortable with the lack of progress. And they're mobilizing on our streets and fighting back. So when we look at that and overlay it with current life structures, hierarchical systems, people who hold power and do not necessarily have a voice to young people, we're missing a real gem, the opportunity to reimagine. And if we look at the education choices that we perhaps steer young people towards, when they have knowledge that perhaps they're not going to help them with the big, hefty challenges we have ahead of us, and the interdisciplinary nature of how we're going to merge science and technology, or nano and technology, or creative technologies, or biotechnologies, the interconnection between fields of work and knowledge. But we also have to think about how long we're going to live for, because the population is not going to shrink, and although we are getting older very quickly, we have to think about the next 15 years as a first horizon, 30 years, 50 years, 100 and 500 years, and just keep thinking about who is steering the ship. Just some great examples of how things can happen when youth get involved. The recent London Marathon, there was such pushback by the number of bottles that are discarded on the roads afterwards that they invested in these seaweed pouches, which are edible or throw away, but they biodegrade immediately instead of plastic bottles. So 200,000 of them were distributed during that one race. When you have companies like Patagonia who are actually telling people on the Black Friday sales, don't buy any more clothes from us. We want you to have the same jacket for many seasons. Don't add to the consumer model, and that's their marketing strategy. We heard this morning, we woke up, we all heard this as UN reported, that we now have 1 million species at the brink of extinction. These are the headlines our children woke up to. And every day they wake up to something similar. We hear that global carbon emissions are reaching record highs. They're studying these subjects in their classrooms, and they're talking about them in the evenings on social media. So our connections of all our industries have become these complex ecosystems. And what we have to think about is, are we letting all the voices in? Do we truly have the diversity of thought and backgrounds and understanding and provocations, or are we gainfully going along and saying, we're going to continue with a 9-to-5 business, we'll expect people to drive in and spend all their time with us, we'll let them go home at 5 o'clock. We'll take small tidbits of information, but basically they have to earn their stripes and eventually they'll get to the top. Are we truly able to listen and engage? Because their priorities of both the millennials and the Generation Z is that they don't think businesses should be just about profit. They want to see organisations giving back first and foremost to the local community, to the staff. They want fairness, equity, equality, and they even are prepared to share what they earn with everyone else to make sure there is equality across an organisation in a way no generation has seen before. They're saying no single person should be favoured if everybody's chipping in and doing their very best. They're aware of the rapid urbanisation as we move to become megacities. These enormous 10, 15, 20 million population cities around the world as people gravitate away from the rural lifestyles to follow the jobs into the cities. We know about resource scarcity, and we know that we're moving away from goods to services, and they want to push that. How do you provide the service instead of replacing the good? It's been a common theme from today. And platforms are everywhere. Most of them, you'll know of them, whether it's your Airbnb or your Ubers, but there are so many more. The idea of shared working spaces, and you have them here in Gisborne. Do you really need a place to work? An office or a place to work? Which is it? Because I think it's the point raised earlier today. Do you need a drill or a hole in the wall? We have to be thinking differently about our resources because we're going to be challenged on these exact questions. Why do we need a big office? Why do we need the real estate? Why do I need to travel across town to get there between the hours that suit you? What if I like working in the evenings? What if I'm really productive in the weekends? What if during the day I have to care for my mother, my sister, my daughter, my son? Do we need classrooms or a place to learn? This is not either or, but an and. Let's make sure we understand the learning that happens outside the classrooms and where information is being sourced. I want to talk about these particular companies because they're a pretty good example of how fast things change. If you look at these companies, and if you don't know them, I'll just go through. Lime Scooters, one of many different brands around the country. Onzo, the bikes, again, many others. Ola, rental cars by the hour. Afterpay, basically it's putting payment over time. And Uber Eats, a food delivery service. You go back over recent decades, has New Zealand had companies that rent bikes by the hour, delivered food? Have you been able to rent cars? Yes, all of these have existed forever. So why now? Why now is this huge surge from these international companies who come onto our land, not necessarily with people, but just purely with an app interface, and have created an entire economy around the portfolio worker? The people who don't want to work 9 to 5. The people who choose to have flexibility. And the people who also are looking for ease of use and not old, antiquated analog systems. And while you can argue there are many people who are on the wrong side of the ledger here who are only working in these companies because they can't get other work, there are many who are also who couldn't work if they didn't have the flexibility. Students, parents, people who are carers. There are people for many reasons. And in fact, some people who I've met when I've been in these various ride-sharing companies who are doing it just because they enjoy it. What we have to imagine is, why did these changes happen? We can accept they come into our ecosystem, into our economy, but the crux of it is they're doing things faster, better, simpler, and bringing in flexibility. But this has happened for years. In India, they've had, for well over 100 years, people who bring home-cooked meals into corporate offices every day. It's a network of incredible workers who, so it's basically the collaborative economy 100 years old. How do you take a resource you have and share it with others who need it? And so some of this, particularly those who are looking through a multi-world lens, will be saying, we've always done this. But let's make sure we understand how we scale it. How do we impact so we can actually have an entire generation who can adopt these ways and create wealth for themselves in terms of strength and security for their families, but also a flexibility of choice. Some other ones here, and actually I'm too far away, I haven't got my glasses on. Sharing campers and cars, sharing pet care walkers and dog walkers. Park down the bottom left in the purple, a New Zealand company that you can just park in people's driveways or in their schoolyard or wherever it might be. So a lot of people within the economy are managing to clip the ticket with assets they already have. The motor car they have, the caravan that sits in the backyard. We have to think about this in a very different way and look at the resources and saying, how do we get the most out of those resources? In the same way we want to get the most out of our youth. In South Auckland here, the Sikh Temple Community Garden, where they're going and growing for the community and actually taking it out to locals. And just the gift of generosity. Or the food generation. Or there's another food generation called the ugly fruit, the stuff that can't be sold, and people who grow in their trees and those really warped lemons that fall to the ground, and making sure people know how to find those and come and gather and pick them up from your place or share them back to the community. The wonderful thing around technology is it means that we can do this because we have the way of connecting these different isolated communities of people. One I particularly love here, in terms of really sharing of food at the end of the day in Wellington, where leftover cafe food is redistributed before it spoils. Or shared tool sheds. Back to the drill. And then resale platforms. So a number of companies now allowing you to take back your products and resell them. From the IKEAs of the world right down to some of these companies making sustainable products and just so they can constantly recycling them through. All of these are great indicators of a change that's happening. It's grassroots, it's organic, but it's driven by a generation. We even have things like snowball effect here, where you can invest in companies, just small amounts of money to invest in some of your favourite sustainable products and brands. You know, we could spend the afternoon just filling the screen with more and more companies who are understanding it's not just about big profit, it's about purpose and contribution back. The other way we have to think about it is disintermediation. Taking out the middleman, the banker, the travel agent, the booking agent, the insurance rep. And what that looks like is we start using a model that started in technology, what we call SaaS, software as a service, the likes of when you might get Microsoft and you just pay a monthly subscription now, or your Spotify feed or your Netflix, And they've taken that SaaS model and they're applying it to almost every service you can imagine, from logistics. If you've got a half-filled truck, let's make sure somebody puts something in it so you're not having unutilized space travelling up and down the country or on a train, through to toothbrushes as a service, socks and shavers as services. So supplying it as you need it, and just actually looking at taking away the need for physical stores and large amounts of carbon that's used to move things around the country unnecessarily. But this is going to take talent, a different type of talent than we've had before. And we talk about it here, people who can dream and imagine and reimagine, and those who can actually build and create things that we haven't seen before, because the challenges ahead are just so immense. And having spent so much time across the education system, from 5-year-olds through to people doing postgraduate studies, for me the magic is under 14. Before they lose that imagination, before they haven't been told they can't do it, before they have all the hurdles and the pressures of formal exams, and that moment in time when they see the world as a playground, and they see the things that need to be fixed. And I would say to you, if you have any way of engaging with these youngest members of our community, just start to see through their lens. We will solve problems faster because they can see it in a way we just cannot imagine. So I want to leave by having the commentary is, you can't sit back. You cannot have an impact with minimal effort. If you're still doing things in your workplace which look like they did 20 years ago, 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, if you haven't moved, if you don't have a diverse workforce, if you don't have youth at the table, if you're still rigid in the way you think, if you still have vast amounts of paper and you haven't moved to being paperless and in the cloud, you will be challenged by a generation asking, when is this going to happen? They look at sustainability and they wonder why you're doing things in such an old-fashioned way. And for me, in my own organisation, my younger staff members challenged me on all sorts of things. First of all, to go paperless. Second of all, we had to all have keep cups. There was no plastics allowed. The next thing was we had to have crockery. If we went to the sushi shop down the street, we had to take our plate with us and put the sushi pieces on the plate and bring it back. And at the beginning, I was saying, really, you're just bullying me now? And now I wouldn't do it any differently. You realise how quickly they really mean this. They have a clothes swap inside the office. Last weekend, just 2 days ago, we put a glass house into our backyard so we could have a shared garden. You know, I'm just astounded by the ideas they keep coming up with. May is Winter Health Month, and they're talking about how they can support each other through winter ailments, and who's got lemons, and who's got honey from the family somewhere else. And it's just incredible, and you just realise the sense of community is so strong, and it goes back to that trust barometer. The people around you need to be able to trust, and that's our strength that we have. So don't avoid difficult decisions or delay them. Take them to the board. Take them to whoever makes or stops the decisions happening. I always say, don't push against a closed door. Find an open door and go through that one. Don't preserve options. I grew up in Hawara and Taranaki, and I still have a dad who says global warming, he's not so sure about it. He wants to keep his options open. And I look at him and just think, gosh, you know, how is this possible? And he just says, well, just in case it's wrong. And we have this discussion. You cannot keep your options open in the light of hard facts. And you can't avoid the need to learn, because we have to learn every day. We have to get the best information we can today and tomorrow and keep replacing it and unlearning and relearning as better information becomes available. I think it's an exciting time because we have a window of opportunity left to change things. But that window is closing so fast, and the way through it is we really need to engage our communities, include young people, and be really open to change. Thank you.